see it on Facebook.
Excellent. That's what I said.
Hello, everybody. My name is Peter Muise. I'm the author of Legends and Lore of the North Shore. It's my first book. Just quickly by way of intro, I was always one of those people who liked mythology, folklore, things like that when I was a kid. When I was in college and graduate school, I studied anthropology, so kind of more of the same. And once I was done with grad school, I was living in Boston and realized I didn't really know that much about the folklore of my own home area, which is New England. I'm from here, and have lived in New England all my life. So I really started to, read old histories, research folklore, and kind of the myths of our own area. And I started to write a blog. I've written that blog about 6 years now. And last year, a publishing company said, "Oh, are you interested in doing a book?" I said, "Sure, why not?" And so this is the result. And I really focused on the North Shore because it's such an old part. Even for New England, the North Shore is old, and just lots of interesting things have happened there. So I just want to read a short section about some things that happened in Newbury, just down the road, which is nice and adjacent to us. And if you are interested, you can probably actually go and see the site where these things happened. So this is called Elizabeth Morse and Caleb Powell, Witchcraft in Old Newbury. And most of this is taken from History of Newbury, which was written in the 19th century. It also incorporates some trial records from a witch trial which takes place. Although the Salem trials were the most famous of their kind, there were other witchcraft trials on the North Shore before them. For example, in 1651, John Bradstreet of Rowley was accused of having familiarity with the devil and bewitching a dog. During his trial, he confessed to having a magic book and hearing a voice that told him to build a bridge over the sea and a bridge up to heaven. Bradstreet was whipped for lying and having fanciful delusions. The bewitched dog did not get off so lightly and was unfortunately hanged, which is true. Other trials followed after John Bradstreet's. In 1670, Anne Burt of Lynn was accused of witchcraft, as was Bridget Oliver of Salem in 1680. Neither was found guilty. And just a side note, Bridget Oliver later married. She became Bridget Bishop and was executed in the Salem witch trials. So, Elizabeth Morse of Newbury was not so lucky as those other people. In 1680, this elderly woman was found guilty of witchcraft and sentenced to death. Elizabeth Morse and her husband, William, a shoemaker, lived in a small house on Market Street in Newbury. This part of Old Newbury is now Newbury Port, and the Morse house was near what is now St. Paul's Church on High Street. The Morses lived there with their grandson, John Stiles. In the fall of 1679, the Morse household began to be afflicted with strange happenings. Sticks and stones were thrown against the house in the middle of the night, but no one could be seen throwing them. One of the family's hogs mysteriously appeared inside the house one night at midnight when all the doors were locked. A basket was thrown down the chimney, but when William took the basket and laid it on a table, it disappeared and came down the chimney once more. An andiron from the fireplace danced across the table and knocked over a soup pot. These strange phenomena were just minor inconveniences compared to the violent physical attacks against Elizabeth and William. During the trial, William said, "My wife came out of the other room, a wedge of iron being thrown at her, and a spade, but did not reach her, and a stone, which hurt her much. A shoe, which we saw in the chamber before, came down the chimney, the door being shut, and struck me a blow on the head, which did much hurt." Their grandson was also afflicted. John suffered from strange fits and seizures, and at night he said his bed jumped up and down. The local doctor was summoned, but could not diagnose a physical ailment. It seemed likely the cause was supernatural. Elizabeth Morse was not popular with her neighbors, and people began to mutter that she was a witch and had bewitched her own home. Caleb Powell, a sailor and friend of the family who lived nearby, offered to help the Morses. As William said during the trial, Powell said he much grieved for me, and said the boy was the cause of all my trouble, and my wife was much wronged and was no witch. And if I would let him have the boy but one day, he would warrant me no more trouble. I being persuaded to it, he came the next day at the break of day, and the boy was with him until night, and I had not any trouble since. William and Elizabeth were not convinced by the sailor's explanation. Instead, they were suspicious. They thought that if Caleb Powell was able to stop the strange phenomena, then he must have been the person who caused it in the first place. Therefore, in their minds, Caleb Powell was the witch. They went to the authorities with their suspicions and had Powell arrested on December 8th, 1679. Several people testified against Powell at his trial. A woman named Elizabeth Titcomb said Powell had been brought up by a wizard in Gloucester named Francis Norwood, who had studied the black arts. And Francis Norwood was also a Quaker, so people were like doubly suspicious. He's a Quaker, the worst thing you could make. One man named John Badger claimed Powell knew astrology and astronomy, while William Moore said Powell knew the working of spirits, some in one country and some in another. The bosun of Powell's ship reportedly said, if there were any wizards, he was sure Caleb Powell was one. Things didn't look good for Caleb Powell, but when he took the stand, he offered a mundane explanation for what had been happening in the Morse household. He said that one day when he was walking by their house, he stopped and looked in the window. Inside, he saw William Moore sitting at prayer with his eyes closed. A moment later, his grandson John entered the room and threw a shoe at the old man's head. There was no witchcraft involved, Powell argued, just a mischievous boy playing pranks. This was why the uncanny activity stopped once he removed John from the house. The court set Caleb Powell free in February 1680. The judges did not acquit him, but instead said he justly deserves to bear his own shame and the costs of prosecution of the complaint. Apparently, they didn't think he was bewitching the Morse household, but it seems they still suspected he was dabbling in magic. Although Caleb Powell was happy to be free, the people of Newbury weren't pleased with the judge's decision. They knew that some witch must be responsible, so they came forth with their original suspicion and accused Elizabeth Morse of bewitching her own household. The authorities arrested Elizabeth and put her on trial. Elizabeth Morse was argumentative, a personality trait that had not endeared her to the citizens of Newbury. 17 neighbors came forward to testify against her, airing petty complaints and grievances that went back a dozen years. Many of the accusations involved livestock. One neighbor said that after he argued with Elizabeth, his cow would not nurse its own calf. Sheep also wandered mysteriously onto the Morses' property. Clearly, she was trying to steal them through witchcraft. Zechariah Davis of Salisbury testified that after he argued with Elizabeth Morse over some fowl, one of his calves danced and roared, and then was sitting upon his tail like a dog. And I never see no calf sit after that manner before. The calf died shortly after. John Chase testified that Elizabeth Morse had entered his bedroom through a tiny hole one night, while another man claimed he saw half her body walking around during the daytime. Clearly, Elizabeth had been sending out her specter to terrorize the town. James Brown claimed that a bruise appeared on Elizabeth's leg in the same spot where he struck a cat that was pestering him, implying that the cat really had been Elizabeth's spirit in feline form. Most seriously of all, once when Elizabeth saw a sick child, she told his mother she thought the child might die. The child died soon afterward, and his mother accused Elizabeth of murdering it through magic. Elizabeth was also accused of killing one Goodwife Chandler. And many people know this, but Goodwife was sort of a title women held similar to Mrs. now. So you often hear like goody this or goody that, sort of shorthand for Goodwife. Goodwife Chandler had become ill shortly after a visit from Elizabeth Morse and suspected she had been bewitched. She nailed a horseshoe over her door to keep Morse out, which seemed to work until one of her more pious neighbors took it down, saying that even defensive magic was the devil's work. Elizabeth Morse came to visit again, and Goody Chandler died soon after. Although all this testimony sounds like gossip and coincidence to a modern reader, the judges felt otherwise. They were convinced Elizabeth Morse was a witch and sentenced her to death. But the execution order was never carried out. Although the historical records are a little unclear, it seems that she got a reprieve from the governor and her sentence was reduced to house arrest. She spent the remainder of her short life confined to her home. The stress of the trial and the harsh jail conditions had ruined her health, and she died only after a few years. Her grandson, John Stiles, who probably was the cause of all her problems, escaped any punishment.